Hi and welcome. You're listening to the X22 Report. My name is Dave and this is episode 694 and today's date is June 17th, 2015 and the title of this episode is Greece Makes the First Move, Debt is Illegal and Odious. Let's get right into the economic collapse news. Now we see the situation in Greece. It is really heating up. The Central Bank of Greece is very worried. They're worried that there's going to be no agreement whatsoever. And this might mark the beginning of a painful course that would lead Greece to a default and ultimately to a country's exit from the euro area. Now, I believe the central banks have been preparing for this all along because we know the IMF was looking at all the different situations. The ECB has been looking at different models. And we see today Greece came out and they made the first move. The Greek parliament and Syriza members said she had established a new Truth Committee on Public Debt, whose purposes was to investigate how much of the debt is illegal with a view to writing it off. Now, we talked about this many reports ago because they were looking at the debt. They were saying, well, a lot of this debt was created illegally, which means then it is odious, which means the people do not have to pay this back. And we can see moments ago, the committee released its preliminary findings, and here is the conclusion from the full report. All the evidence we present in the report shows that Greece not only does not have the ability to pay this debt, but also should not pay this debt first and foremost because the debt emerging from the Troika's arrangement is direct infringement on the fundamental human rights of the residents of Greece. Hence, we came to the conclusion that Greece should not pay this debt because it is illegal, illegitimate, and odious. Greece has effectively just declared that it will no longer have to default on the IMF because the debt is illegal. And what they're saying is that all of this debt was created in bad faith, and it was done with the previous government, with Goldman Sachs, the IMF, the ECB. And as they continually look into this situation, they're starting to see that there were many illegal acts that were done by the creditors, which purposefully damaged Greece's fiscal sovereignty. And this is why they're saying it is odious, illegal, illegitimate right now. And it violated the economic self-determination and fundamental human rights for Greece. So here at this point in time, we can see they are saying, guess what? We're not writing it off. It's completely illegal. It just doesn't exist. Iceland did something like this where they wrote off all the debt. And we see Greece is heading down the same exact road. And we know that the central bank in Greece, we understand the ECB, the IMF, the central banking system, they have been preparing for this type of situation. And I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing capital controls all of a sudden where things just start shutting down. Because we can see that JP Morgan Chase, they are looking at this situation and they have already prepared a walkthrough of what capital controls would look like. Limits would be imposed on the ability of households and firms to withdraw their deposits in cash or to move them out of the country. Firms who need to transfer funds abroad as part of their normal business have to provide documentation to show those movements are indeed related to commercial activity rather than a portfolio shift. So what we're seeing right now is the same thing that occurred in Cyprus. And if we look back to March 27, 2013, we see the capital controls that were put into effect were on every person $300 to be withdrawn, which was 300 euros. And we can see that businesses were not able to move funds around. People could not transfer funds out of the country. And you needed written explanation of why you wanted to do this. And of course, in the beginning they said, oh, okay, the capital controls, we're going to just take a portion of your money in the bank, maybe a measly 7 to 8, 10%, Don't worry about it. We're going to give you some worthless bank stock. And it turned out that they took 47% on average. They basically stole from all of these people from inside the bank. You don't need bank robbers anymore. You have the bankers themselves. And we can see the same thing is going to happen. They're leading up to this. And we see right now the BRICS system, they're inviting Greece in. And Greece is saying, listen, we are fully supporting the BRICS initiative. And we are investigating ways for Greece to get involved in this initiative that could be beneficial for both sides. And this is coming from the Greek minister. And we understand that Greece is meeting with Putin. During this time period, they'll be meeting with the BRIC system. And we can see that, yes, they will be making a move very shortly. But we'll have to see what card the bankers play at this time. Where are they going to go when they say, okay, all this debt is non-existent because it was created illegally? Will this create a credit default swap? Will the derivatives all of a sudden have a cascading effect? Will other countries look at this and saying, whoa, wait a minute, maybe we should follow? And will this tear the entire Eurozone apart? And we're going to have to watch this very carefully. We knew this situation was coming. And you have to remember, if we go back to 2008, these same central bankers told us that Greece was doing fine. We gave them debt. They're fine. All they have to do is implement austerity. We're going to give them some more debt. They're fine. All they have to do is implement austerity. And we see from that period on to now, the country collapsed under the central bank rule, because that is what they do. They put countries into debt. They make the people suffer. They privatize the country. They steal their natural resources. And then they say, oh, you owe us all this money because you are in debt. This is what the central bank has been doing around the world to every single country, non-stop. Look at Italy, look at France, look at Spain, look at the US, look at Canada. It's continuous, it's ongoing. Until we get rid of the central bank, this problem will not go away. And when it does go away, the central bankers are always going to try to slither their way back into the system, because this is what they do. They do this continuously in every country. And we can see that's all they care about. They don't care about war. Actually, they love war. They profit from war. Then they profit from rebuilding. And then they hope that the people will forget and the governments will forget, and they'll be able to start the scam all over again. Because that's exactly what this is. It is a huge scam. And we see here in the United States that things are absolutely getting worse. The economy is not improving whatsoever. The housing market is completely falling apart. U.S. mortgage applications fall as rates hit the highest level since October 2014. And we knew about this if we go back to August of 2013 when Obama was giving a speech in Arizona, in Phoenix, saying that the housing market is in full recovery. Things are looking up. And the same time he was giving this speech, in the month of August, moving into September, October, the main financial institutions, Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, Bank of America, they were laying off thousands upon thousands of people in their mortgage department. So on one hand, he's telling us that the real estate market is back on its feet. And on the other hand, the banks are saying, okay, no, there are no Americans taking out mortgages. We don't need these people because we know what's happening. The Fed is going to give free money to all these investment companies, hedge funds. They're going to put this back into the system. They're going to pay cash. So there's no need to have all these people in the mortgage departments. And this continued up to the present day. And we see it continuing. We see Discover right now is going to be laying off about 460 jobs, about 3% of its workforce. And where is this? In their mortgage unit. If the real estate market is bouncing back, why aren't Americans taking out mortgages? I mean, you can't tell me that every American has all of this cash to pay for their houses fully with cash from their savings. It makes no sense. Because as we know, back in 2007, moving into 2008 to 2009, a lot of people foreclosed on their house. A lot of people had short sales. A lot of people lost their jobs, never got a high-paying job once again, lost a lot of their retirement and their life savings. And during this stretch of about 7 years, people have struggled and they're living paycheck to paycheck. So we know it isn't the American people who are just whipping out hundreds of thousands of dollars and saying, I'm just going to pay for that house in cash. Because we know 93 plus million Americans are out of the workforce. So where is this coming from? This is coming from the central bank. This is a central bank economy. It is not a people economy. And this is what they are doing to convince everyone that we are in a recovery. But when we look at everything, we realize we are not in a recovery. We are in a total collapse situation because we have bubbles in the housing market that mimic 2008, in the student loan arena, in the stock market, in the bond market, in the derivative market, in the auto industry market. And if you remember back to 2008 going into 2009, a lot of these bubbles look very, very similar at this point in time. And we are headed towards a complete meltdown. And this is why they're trying so hard to get that war started, to cover up the entire thing. And we know the debt going back to 2008 is a lot worse. What was it? 9 trillion? 10 trillion? Well, now it's 18 trillion. It doubled in 7 years. And right now the debt clock is frozen at $18.112 trillion for 90 days. Because it's right below the limit. Does it really matter if we have a limit at this point in time? Because sooner or later, the debt will not be able to be sustained. So, yeah, Congress can pretend, they're cutting certain things, but the debt will continually go up. And sooner or later, just like Greece, just like Cyprus, just like every single one of these countries, the debt cannot be sustained. And what I mean by this is that the revenue coming into the government cannot make the payments. This is why the interest rates are so low. They tick up a little bit. The Fed goes ahead and raises it. Maybe not the first tick up, but additional ticks going forward will completely bring down this system. And this is why they've been keeping it close to 0%. Because they know the revenue coming in from all these people that had high-paying jobs, who went to a part-time job, the revenue isn't the same. This is why they have FATCA. They're going around the world looking for more revenue. This is why they created Obamacare. This is why Obama's out there saying, global warming. We must implement a carbon tax to tax all of these people. They're looking to impose taxes on anything they possibly can to bring in revenue. They don't understand why people aren't spending in retail. They don't understand why people aren't purchasing. They don't get what is going on here. Well, maybe some of them do. They realize the entire system is falling apart. And those who are in charge, they realize this. And this is why they're trying to provoke war around the world. But the rest of our government employees, they really don't know what's going on. They're being paid off by, yes, the central bank and other foreign governments to do their bidding. But most of them are completely blinded about everything. They have no clue what's really going on because they just see money coming in. And they're fine. We see China and Australia. They have signed and sealed a free trade agreement which is expected to deliver a 20 billion boost to mutual trade by 2035. Currently, the trade between Australia and China stands about 160 billion annually. Under the China-Australian Free Trade Agreement, Australia hopes to get a better market access to China, improve its competitive position, increase two-way investment, and reduce import costs. More than 85% of Australian export goods will be tariff-free, rising to 95% on full implementation. Australian businesses currently face tariffs of up to 40% on goods exported to China. So again, China, Russia, making deals all around the world. And other countries are looking at the situation and saying, okay, we understand the private Western central bank system is falling apart. We need to protect ourselves. We see Pakistan is going to be joining the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And they're getting ready to do this, and they're looking to do this between July 8th and 9th. So we see many nations are looking to join the SCO. That would be Afghanistan, Mongolia, Turkey, Sri Lanka, Belarus, and many others. They're all looking to join because, again, they are making deals, Russia and China, around the world, pushing away from the dollar. That's what they're doing right now. And we see BRICS, they're continuing with this theme. They're saying, okay, we're going to make a multilateral payment system similar to SWIFT. They're saying that the entire system is going to work without the Western SWIFT system. It'll be independent. And many countries have expressed interest in the activities of this structure, mainly in Latin America, Asia, and Africa. Strange, this is all the places where the United States government central bankers would love to get into. They're just continually trying to bring in troops, and they're trying to garrison these countries. They're trying to have protest uprisings to remove the government because they know all of these countries are looking away from the private Western central bank system, and they're looking east to China, to Russia, because everyone's starting to realize that the dollar is on its last legs. The Bank of China will become the first Chinese bank to join the auction process that sets gold prices in the London market. The bank, along with 7 other lenders, will start participating in the twice-daily electronic auction. And we can see at this point in time that China is the world's largest bullion buyer. And it has never directly played a role in determining London gold prices. And we know that China has amounted a lot of gold. They're sitting on a lot of gold because eventually they're going to use this as an insurance policy and to back up the yuan renminbi. And when they do this, this is going to be a huge problem for the dollar. And while all this is going on, we see the US, the EU still pushing sanctions on Russia. The EU Council has agreed on a 6-month extension of economic sanctions against Russia, even though they know it's going to hurt their economies. That people are going to be put out of work. Their economies are going to suffer. The U.S. government, the central bankers, have convinced them it is in their best interest to do this. But it really is not. It's hurting them, and they know this. We see the petro-yuan is now going to be also used for natural gas. Russia and China are completely de-dollarizing, and they're going to settle all the natural gas in yuan. And China will be settled in yuan, amounting to hundreds of billions in renminbi, settled trade over the life of the deals. This is how it works. Gazprom delivers gas to China. China pays Gazprom in yuan. convertible into rubles. Gazprom funds itself increasingly in yuan. Russia buys Chinese goods and services in yuan, convertible into rubles. Putting this all together, China, via both the settlement of energy exports from Russia in renminbi and yuan-denominated loans from the Silk Road Fund, can effectively create its own closed-loop yuan recycling system with Russia, which should, over time, serve to facilitate China's transition away from the smokestack economy while helping to relieve industrial overcapacity. So, they're completely de-dollarizing. They're creating their own loop with their system to give currency for services and goods, just like the United States did back in the good old days when people would pay for the oil using the dollar, and they would come back with those dollars and buy goods from the United States. Well, those days are gone. The system cannot be sustained. And this is why we're seeing all of this at this time. Because other countries like Russia, China, the BRICS nations, the AAIB, and all the nations that have joined that, realize what's happening here. They realize the system is falling apart. They realize that there's going to be a new system. So they're protecting themselves. That's what they are doing right now. And again, we have to remember the U.S. government central bankers, they're not going to go down and say, okay, yeah, that's fine. Our system is done. Here's the new system. No. They're going to do whatever they possibly can to keep this system, even if it means war. Now, I talk about Obamacare quite extensively. If you go back to my other reports, those people who are new, if you go back to my other reports, you can hear what I have to say about Obamacare. And when we go back in time, we realize that the Obamacare website was a complete disaster. It was not built correctly. A lot of the security is not there. And we're starting to learn that Obamacare is going to keep everyone's data basically forever. The system known as Multidimensional Insurance Data Analytics, or MIDAS, is vaguely described on the federalhealthcare.gov as a perpetual central repository. Obamacare keeps the personal information of enrollees forever, has now raised concerns from experts. Lee Tien, a senior staff attorney for the Electronic Frontier Foundation, stated that it is irresponsible of the government to retain data any longer than it is necessary. And why would they need to keep all this data? And we have to think about this for a second. The government, in a non-secure Obamacare database, is keeping all of our information. Now let's back up here for a second. They're continually telling us that there's cyber attacks on corporations, on the government. They're continually telling us that China, Russia, North Korea have stolen information from a federal database, that was China, from Sony, that was North Korea. Russia has malware in the financial systems and in the electric infrastructure. And the government says, listen, all these cyber attacks, we need your private information from corporations to keep you safe. This is the way we can figure out how these attacks are occurring, by having my Social Security, by having my purchases, by having my financial information, by having my information of where I go shopping, where I am at any point in time. How will this help them? It won't. But they're making everyone believe this, and this is why they're trying to pass this up, because this will help them keep everyone safe. Now, we all understand, and if you believe the real story, this is what they're trying to show everyone, that because of these cyber attacks, we need to do this. And then we have Obamacare, where they put together this website, which didn't work, which is not secure, and they're going to keep all of your information. Now let's think about this further. The federal database was hit. They couldn't keep that secure. What makes them think that they have the ability to keep your information secure? First of all, the government is absolutely terrible in security. Actually, their story is backfiring. The last thing we should do is give the private information to them, because they've shown us they can't keep the data secure. I mean, look what they're trying to convince us of. There's cyber attacks from other countries, so give us your private information and we will keep it safe. But the federal government was hacked and they couldn't keep that information safe. So their story is completely falling apart. They have like so many different agendas here. They're overlapping and they're not making sense because they're trying to push legislation through. This is why we're seeing all of this. And Obamacare wants to keep all of your information forever in a website that was poorly built, in a system that is not secure, in a system where there are already data leaks. And I guess that's why they put that little provision in CISA where they said, well, if we get the private information from the corporations, we won't hold the corporations liable. Well, then the corporations at this point in time should really start to think, do they really want to hand over this information to the government? Because they can't keep it safe. And what will happen if the U.S. government gets CISA passed, you will see all of these cyber attacks kind of disappear. Just like they told us with DHS when they were looking to get their budget approved and funded. All the warnings about malls being under attack by the Islamic State, where they had chatter and information, and as soon as DHS was funded and their budget was approved, it just completely disappeared. We haven't heard a thing about it, have we? It's the same thing that is occurring right now. If you notice, it's always the surface information, and they're trying to convince everyone through these cyber attacks that we need the government. Actually, we don't need the government. The government is always in it for themselves and for their own agenda. And this is why their story about all of this is completely falling apart and now intersecting and not making sense at this time. We also see that Obama tried to push through his fast track, and right now that did not get approved, and they're putting it off for 6 more weeks, and they'll revisit that. But when we look closer at the TPA, and we've discussed this many times, in the TPA, and if it passes, the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty would not need to be subject to senatorial debate. In fact, it would not be up for debate at all. TPA calls for a simple up or down vote on such presidentially brokered international agreements. And we have to remember, John Kerry already signed the United Nations Arms Trade Treaty. The Senate has to ratify it. But if they get the fast track approved, it's just an up and down vote. And what this means is it's a backdoor into gun control. Because we have to remember, the Arms Trade Treaty grants a monopoly over all weaponry in the hands of the very entity responsible for over 300 million murders in the 20th century, governments. Article 2 of the treaty defines the scope of the treaty prohibitions. The right to own, buy, sell, trade, or transfer all means of armed resistance, including handguns, is denied to civilians by this section of the Arms Trade Treaty. Article 3 places the munitions fired, launched, or delivered by the conventional arms covered under Article 2 within the scope of the treaty's prohibition as well. Article 4, and the President already created the executive orders for this, places all parts and components of weapons within this scheme. And everything has to be registered, traced, tracked in a national control system with a list. So we can see at this point in time that this is what they're trying to push forth. They have many backdoors and a lot of power given to the president if this is put on the fast track. If these trade agreements are passed. Again, the government is not working for the people anymore. They are working for themselves, and this has been for a long time. They're working for themselves, for corporations, and bankers, not for the people. And we can see none of this benefits the people whatsoever. Actually, it does the opposite. And this is what the government always does. They tell you one thing and it's always the opposite. Affordable Care Act, very expensive. The Patriot Act, spying on American people. The USA Freedom Act, spying on the American people. So none of what they tell you is the truth. Everything is always the opposite of what they're trying to convince you of. We're in a recovery. We know we're in a collapse. We know we're heading towards a major decline in everything, and they're trying to convince you of the opposite. It's always the opposite of what they tell you. Now, we see out in Afghanistan, and we understand the U.S. government central bankers are never leaving Afghanistan. First of all, the Islamic State is already in Afghanistan, if you believe the official story, which means that the U.S. government central bankers and other nations videoed the Islamic State inside Afghanistan to show that, yes, they're there, because they're trying to get the authorization for war passed, which allows them to go to any country that has the Islamic State. And we know the Islamic State is a proxy army for the U.S. government. And Putin is out there saying, listen, we would like to work with NATO and the U.S. to cooperate with Russia to battle against the illicit drugs in Afghanistan. And we know the U.S. and NATO, they don't want to do that because the poppy fields is a cash cow for them. It pays for their covert operations. They protect the poppy fields. Actually, the poppy fields completely were almost wiped out before the U.S. got in there, before NATO got in there. And right after 9/11, when they said we had to go into Afghanistan, trying to track down Osama bin Laden, which was completely fake, phony, and false, all of a sudden the poppy fields flourished because they were using it to sell overseas as opium to pay for their covert missions. Now, they're not dealing with Russia because Russia's out there saying, listen, we should get everyone together, the Shanghai Cooperation, the BRICS. We should all work together to get rid of the drugs in Afghanistan. But U.S. and NATO forces, they don't want to have anything to do with this whatsoever. We also understand the United States government central bankers have been trying to get into Nigeria, and now we see a new president that was elected. And we had government employees going down to Nigeria to talk to the new president. I think it was John Kerry who went down there to convince them that, yes, you need the United States to go after Boko Haram, because this is a terrorist group that the United States created to cause havoc in this country, because we understand that in Nigeria, they have a very close relationship with China. There's a lot of oil there. Wherever China and Russia are, this is where the U.S. is trying to get into, not through economic deals, through force, through illusionary measures to convince them that they need the United States. And right now we see the United States plans to provide about $5 million to help support a regional military force fighting Boko Haram. So it looks like they are definitely moving into Nigeria at this point. Now, out in Ukraine, we understand that the situation is pretty much the same. The Kiev forces are shelling the Donetsk area, the Lugansk area. We see they're setting up blockades. They don't want people in and out of Donbass. And they're continuing with the notion that Donbass is getting ready to attack. And we see that Cyprus is going to send humanitarian aid to the Donbass region. It's about 12 tons of that consists of clothing, food, and other material. And this is the second delivery that Cyprus actually delivered to the Donbass region. And we have to remember, Russia stepped in and modified Cyprus's loans. They basically written some of the loans off, helped Cyprus out with their situation. And it seems that Cyprus is repaying Russia by delivering humanitarian aid to the southeastern region, giving them naval bases in Cyprus. And we can see at this point in time that everything that's going on in Ukraine is being driven by the U.S. to push the southeastern people out and to take over Crimea. And right now we see Ukraine's Navy. They're beginning their tactical naval drills, which involve air units in the Black Sea region. The exercises are aimed at practicing interoperability of naval task forces, naval infantry units, naval aviation, and coastal artillery. The drills involve military personnel with experience of combat action during the special anti-terrorism operation in the east of the country. They're also looking at the newly trained National Guard, where they're involved in these drills. And we can see at this point in time that the United States government, central bankers, they don't care about the Minsk II agreements. They have military forces on the ground training combat units. And while all this is going on, Russia, Germany, France, Ukraine, they're going to meet again on June 23rd, and they're going to discuss the Minsk II agreement and where they should go from here. I'm hoping that this time it does work out and we do see peace in this region, and they come up with some type of an agreement and it holds. Because last time they did, it did not hold. The Minsk II was violated many, many times. The U.S. stepped in, brought in forces, training was happening. And here is a actually it's the third chance now to have peace. Now, will it happen? We'll have to see. I'm going to say most likely Poroshenko will agree to pretty much everything like he did before, and then his masters will direct him in what to do. We see that the United States Air Force is planning to increase its military presence in Europe because of increasing tensions with Russia. They're looking to bring in the F-22 fighter, and this might be stationed in Europe. And they're also announcing plans to station the F-35 in Britain. So we can see right now the United States government, central bankers, NATO, they are maneuvering military assets all over the place. We see NATO is testing its ability to quickly deploy a response force. It's highly ready and technologically advanced multinational force made up of land, air, maritime, and special operation forces in the face of what is perceived as a Russian aggression has already deployed extra forces in and around the Baltic area, but now they're moving into the Mediterranean. And we can see right now this is going to consist of U.S. Marines, and they're going to be on Italian ships, Spanish ships, French ships, Dutch ships. The Marines will test the use of their vertical takeoff and landing aircraft, the MV-22 Osprey, on the Italian aircraft carrier. And we can see that they are moving forces into this region because the U.S. is spread so thin around the world, they need NATO to take up the slack. And this is what we see happening right now. Now, John Kerry, as we know, is out there talking about Iran and the P5+1 talks. Russia's saying, listen, we don't have to go any further. I think we met all criteria, and it looks like the sanctions can be removed. It looks like we can go and have and make deals with Iran. And John Kerry is saying, okay, you know what? Maybe we don't need to go in and inspect their nuclear facilities, because from all the intelligence that we have, we already know what they did. So basically what he's saying is they have no proof. If they go in and inspect all the nuclear facilities, they're going to find absolutely nothing. And everyone's going to look at this and say, okay, they were never doing anything because all the IAEA inspections show nothing. And the intelligence, they never documented, they never proved that they had nuclear weapon capability, or they were creating any type of nuclear weapon. So they're just saying, you know what, we don't have to go in there because we have all the intelligence. So it looks like they've already made the deal to get into the central bank, to put their natural resources on the dollar, and we'll have to see if that is what is going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, they already have preparations, a plan to go in and remove the government of Iran. Because as you know, once they get into Syria, they are not going to stop. Once they remove Assad, they're going to continue on. We see out in Yemen, the talks are not going very well. And all of a sudden, the Islamic State now is in Yemen. They're taking responsibility for the car bomb in the Yemeni capital. So here we have it. The Islamic State is in Yemen, it is in Libya, it is in Lebanon, it is in Iraq, and Syria. All the U.S. government central bankers have to do is pass the authorization for war, and the United States can go into any one of these countries. This was planned from the start. Now we see something very interesting happening. We see the trained forces up in Turkey coming in from the north, pushing down south. We see the Islamic State coming from the east, pushing west towards Damascus. We see now a new Syrian rebel launch offensive in the southern part of Syria, marching north. Damascus is surrounded. They're getting ready to remove Assad. And now here comes all the propaganda. But first, the watchdog for the chemical weapons said that all of Syria's chemical weapons have been neutralized. The Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons welcomes the disposal. Now all the chemical weapons are gone. So the propaganda now is Assad steps up chemical weapon attacks. They're showing that, look at all this devastation from these chlorine gas bombs. Look at what happened. Look at the aftermath. And of course, they have a Syrian doctor who's going to testify in front of Congress about all of the chemical weapons that Assad has been using. But he's not showing evidence. What he's showing is the after effect. Look, see these people? They were hit with chlorine gas. That's not evidence. That's like saying, here's a person who's on trial for murder, and the only proof is that we have these dead bodies. So if we show you the dead bodies, that is proof that this person did it. No, that's not the evidence. That is not what you show. That's the aftermath of what happened. That doesn't prove that Assad did it, and they don't have the proof. That's the problem. So that's why every time the U.S. government central bankers come out with propaganda, they always show the pictures of the devastation, because they can't link it to Assad. They don't have the evidence, the real meat. And this is what we're seeing right now. This doctor, Dr. Mohammed Tanari, will present evidence of 31 attacks. And he'll just show pictures of people suffering. But we know the Islamic State had the chlorine gas. The question is, why would Assad, at this point in time, use this on his own people? Wouldn't that turn all his people against him? How would that work in his favor? It wouldn't. It would be like during the American Revolution, George Washington turning around and saying, okay, I'm going to bomb my own people. It wouldn't make sense. You want the people behind you to fight this war, to get rid of the Free Syrian Army / Islamic State. So this does not stand up to anything except for propaganda. And they're using all of this propaganda to convince us it is time to remove Assad. And this is what we see before it happens. And it is happening, because we're starting to see a lot of propaganda out of Ukraine and a lot of propaganda towards Assad once again. We saw this back before 2013. In 2014, when the Islamic State rose up out of nowhere. A lot of propaganda, and then all of a sudden we had the event. We're seeing the same thing occur again. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.